What up, Hepsters? Welcome to another episode of Knowledge Drop, where I spend about 10 to 30 minutes delivering you some sharp, soulful commentary on the connections between dance, music, history, even culture. And today we're going to explore a little bit more philosophical and even controversial approach. Now, I'm not here to indoctrinize, I'm not here to proselytize. I only ask that you have a open mind for critical. Last episode, we talked about ballet and hierarchy within cultural dynamics and a little bit of ethnocentrism. Today, we're going to take that a step further. So, what does it mean to be human? Now, as human beings, we crave our child need, to know that we exist, that we matter, that we're not alone, and that we belong either in a place or within a group. But defining where and what you belong to is not the same thing as defining who you are. Another question: how do you define human? A human being. What is your definition of that? So here we go into a more philosophical definition of the word human being. So I'm going to give you you can come up with your own, but I'm going to give you my definition for a human being on a philosophical level. So again, here's my definition for a human being. Hue, Huemanbeing. And how do I define this? Hue, a color or shade, the attribute of a color by virtue of which it is discernible. In this case, the brown family. We'll talk a lot about this as we move forward. M, molecular, right? A group of atoms bonded together representing the smallest fundamental unit of a chemical compound that can take part in a chemical reaction. A, anatomical, relating to the bodily structure. And N, neurocomputer, still not satisfied with computer part, but a neurocomputer, a computer that uses neural networks based on the human brain. BE means to exist, right? When you think about Rene Descartes, I think, therefore I am, or the African proverb, I participate, therefore I am. And ING denotes a verbal action. Now let's have a more biological definition of what it means or how we define a human being, right? Biological reality, all humans belong to a species, Homo sapiens. Genetically, we are 99.9% of the same across all so-called races, right? The variations in skin color, hair texture, facial features, etc. All of the results of adaptation to environment. Think of UV exposure over thousands of years, not different races, right? There is no genetic boundary separating one race from another. So my personal belief is that, again, I am a spiritual being and I'm having a human experience. I am not my mind or my body. Both are instruments through which I experience life, but neither defines my true self. I am indefinable. Think about it this way. Look at some photos of yourself in different stages of life. Your appearance changes, yet the one who is seeing those photos, the awareness behind your eyes remains the same. That you inside your spirit self is not what you're looking at. You are the one who's looking. Another approach to this, think about people who have had a limb amputated. Now, often, many of them might experience what you call phantom pain. They feel sensations in the part of the body that's no longer there. And that's because the deeper awareness, the you inside, still receives wholeness. Even when the body has changed, the spirit self remains intact, even when the physical form does not. Okay, here's the question. Is identity something you have, something you build, or something to be acquired. In the book, The Impact of Identity. So this is what Irina Nevzlin has to say. Differentiating between labels and identity. Your identity is a conglomerate. Work on my words, huh? Your identity is a conglomerate of factors, qualities, beliefs, and values that distinguish you from other people. You don't want to make the mistake of defining yourself based on specific physical characteristics or lifestyle choices. These are just labels. They're limited to describing one aspect of your identity. Think of certain words that we use to describe ourselves, like vegan or executive, musician, professor, dancer, black. The problem isn't just the labels, it's how people attach themselves to the labels, right? We often project our identity on the things that are not our true selves. So when I say something like, ballet is not the foundation of all dance, or if I say like Fosse and Luigi are not jazz dance, some people take it personal, right? And it's not because it's about them, but because they've wrapped their sense of self around these ideas. Their reactions are emotional, not factual, because to challenge them feels like an attack on their identity, rather a critique of the form. Let's talk about identity. Identity is not a static entity, right? Or something that is handed to you for keepsakes. Identity is a process that entails continuously asking, who am I? Let's explore a few notions of identity and break each one of those down. Your personal identity, the story you tell yourself about who you are based on name, gender roles, personality, achievement, preferences, or personal history. Why would this be problematic? Personal identity is built through language, memory, and experience. It's not fixed, it changes over time and often unconsciously. Think about ego attachment. We become attached to roles like teacher or artist or parent, etc. Seeing challenges to them often create existential threats. Think about illusion of control. Much of our personality is sort of shaped by external influences like, our family or education, media, trauma, not by conscious choice, right? There's a limits of expansion, right? This limits expansion. So if you say, I'm not, that kind of person, you may unknowingly cut yourself off from transformations or new experiences. Our awareness sees the personality like a costume. It can wear it, it can play it, it can, refine it, but it doesn't mistake it for the true self. Let's think about cultural identity, a sense of belonging to a group defined by shared language, traditions, customs, beliefs, art, and ancestry. Now, y'all that follow me, y'all know I got acronyms for days. And, one of my acronyms for culture, and this is just, again, a philosophical approach, just kind of playing with the ideas. So you think about cult, right? We have the word culture. When you think about cult, which is an excessive admiration for particular things. URE forms the abstract nouns of action. So, in this way, culture is an excessive admiration for particular things, that noun of action. But this still doesn't define you. Nothing defines you unless you allow it. Now, why would this be problematic? Identity is often inherited, not chosen, right? It's a narrative we're born into and taught to uphold before we even question it. It can, in terms of like a group versus the self, it can pressure individuals to conform, sacrificing personal truth over collective approval for authenticity. Exclusionary tendencies, it can create the us versus them binaries, reforming cultural superiority over essentialism. Sort of, look at our current state of affairs in American politics. Cultures evolve. And individuals are multidimensional, but cultural identity often fixes people in places with expectations or stereotypes. True awareness honors cultural experience with becoming bound by it, right? It says, I come from this, but I am not only this. How about national identity? Identifications with a national state, its symbols, history, language, flag, politics, and borders. Why would this be problematic? Nations are political inventions, not eternal truths. The place of your birth is a geographical accident, not a spiritual origin. Tools of control. When you think about tools of control, national identity has been used to justify war, excursions, colonialism, racism, and oppression in the name of patriotism. Again, we see this clearly in American politics. National myths often erase the diversity within a country and homogenize complex, conflicting histories. So, again, who are we? Race in the constructed identity. The concept of race in a legal codification of identifying people as white or black dates back to 1640 with the case of John Punch. On July 9th, 1640, members of the General Court decided the punishment for three servants, a Dutch person, a Scottishman, and an African, who ran away from their indentured servitude. Those white men would, quote unquote, white men would be set free after time spent in indentured servitude. John Punch was sentenced to a lifetime of servitude. The case revealed an example of interracial cooperation among servants at the time when the colonial leaders were starting to create legal differences between Europeans and Africans. So let's talk about of color and race. Physiology classifies the admixtures of the quote unquote races by crosses between quote unquote white and quote unquote black as mulatto. Now, here we have an image of a so called black person, so called white person, and so called albino. This is an image of a so called mulatto, so called quadroon, so called octoroon. Now, a mulatto, if you're not aware of, is a combination of two words, mule, M-U-L-E, which is a cross between a horse and a donkey, and otto, which means combining. So in this look or in this understanding, this construct, the how you determine this is between a white person and a black person. That would be considered a mulatto. This is half African and half European. And between a mulatto and a white person is a quadroon. And so this is one-fourth African, three-fourths European. Between the quadroon and a white person, this would be known as a quintroon, one-fifth. Between a quintroon and a white person, sextaroon. Between a sextaroon and a white person, you get septaroon. And between a septaroon and a white person, you get octoroon. And octoroon is one-eighth African and seven-eighth European. Past all this language of octoroon, sectoroon, septaroons, right? Once you start to think about these labels, right? These things that many of us think are our identities. In this particular case, it's usually we'll hear someone say, "Well, I'm mixed race." You are not mixed race. There is only one race, and those are Homo sapiens, right? Mixed race implies multiple human races, reinforcing the pseudoscience, right? We are not species of different humans. More accurately and probably respectfully is multicultural, multi-ethnic, culturally complex, ancestrally diverse. So these are some of the things, but when I say I'm mixed race. You're not mixed race unless you are mixed with some alien form, then maybe. But again, this as I said before, language is important. And in this particular case, the reason I wanted to talk about all this is to get you thinking about how, when something like a art form, like say ballet, is or uses a lot of cultural context particular to a certain time period that's dealing with hierarchical environments. And by hierarchical, I'm talking about, nobles or dukes and duchesses, kings and queens, monarchs and such. That's when that's passed down as part of the dance form, this becomes the problem, right? How we attach these meanings to not just the cultural that or the group of people that said that this is how they govern themselves, but when we bring it out to a wider audience and then try to hold on to that as the defining characteristic or these traits. Again, we all make this stuff up, and we have to consider like what are we saying and how do I identify and what are we identifying with? What are we feeling connected to, and what is problematic? We have to have these types of conversations, especially in something like dance, which is teaching cultural practices. So let's get into something a little more controversial. As you can see at the top, this is black. At the bottom, this is white. And in the middle, this is us. Back to my definition of human. Hue, multiple shades coming from the family of brown. Now, you have nothing to do with your skin color or what country or culture you were born into. Now, I understand the affirmations like I'm black and I'm proud. These are acts of resistance. They're healing, reclamations in response to systems that have dehumanized or erased, silenced, and even shamed people's experience. But these are conditions of our human experience, not our essence. Now, all words and their meanings are human inventions. Just because meaning is widely accepted doesn't make it inherently true, right? It only means people have agreed to use it in that way. Acceptance is not the same thing as truth, and truth is often relative, shaped by perspective, context, and power. Put it this way, words don't hold truth, they hold agreement, right? Humans create language, assign meaning, and call it fact. But what is accepted isn't always true. It's often just familiar. Returning to this is us. This is a photo of people who identify from Uruguay, from America, people who identify as white, as black, as Asian. And you see just multicultural groups of people, all different shades. And this photo hasn't, it's a little dim, but it hasn't been doctored. And you just see multiple shades from lightest to darkest. Another way to think about this is in this photo, from the lightest to the darkest shade. As human beings, we are of multiple shades of brown. Now, when I talk about this, I had a friend of mine at one point uh, thought that I was suggesting that this supported the quote unquote white narrative of I don't see color. And that's totally not what I'm saying at all. It's not about I don't see color. It is about getting the so called white person to realize their skin tone is brown. Grapple with that. The smallest minority globally is the so called white person. And so getting them to grapple with the fact that their skin is not white in terms of color, their skin is of the largest cream beige tans, right? So that's what if there's a narrative or an agenda, that would be it. Not to say I don't see color, but to say what the real color of human beings are, rest in these shades of brown. And it's to really challenge the thought process behind, again, these identity practices and how people attach meaning to certain things. We're saying stuff, but we're not. I don't think sometimes we're unconscious of what we're actually saying. And so, you always hear white people don't have culture. Because white people is not really a thing. black people is not really a thing. I understand blackness, as I just mentioned. I understand the importance of that. But Irish people have culture, right? Bulgarian people have culture. German people have culture. Italian people have culture. English people have culture. So how can you, white people don't have culture? That makes no sense. The problem is with America, right? The idea of claiming when people would come here, when immigrants would come here way back in the day, they would come here and it was more um, productive for them to claim to be American. And people would accept this idea of whiteness. As a matter of fact, there's in this book here, this is a book on how the Irish became, can you see that? On how the Irish became white. It's starting to fade. So camera keeps going in and out. I gotta excuse my camera. It adjusts on its own. I gotta get that fixed. But um, I'm not reading any particular passage from here, but it's interesting because people talk about Irish and Irish, we know Irish were treated the same way that quote unquote black folks were treated here. And even in this, there's a phrasing in here is like the early years of Irish were frequently referred to as the N word turned inside out, and the Negroes, for their part, were sometimes called smoked Irish. And it was advantageous for Irish people to claim white because it gave them a different access to how they could navigate in America. Europeans in general, who claim whiteness just to have the American dream, did so quite possibly at the expense of abrogating from their own cultural roots. Buying into whiteness meant that you were no longer Irish, you were white. You are no longer Polish, you're white. You are no longer German, you're white. America became the place where one would forego their cultural identity in place of becoming an American. And what is that? America has no real culture outside of genocide and enslavement and war and white supremacy. These are the things that are heavily practiced and celebrated in America. But America's true cultural practices reside with the indigenous peoples of these lands. Everything else is just a ruse. So, going into my conclusion, wrapping this all up, I want to share a drawing that's sped up of somebody drawing a human face. Now, the reason I came to the narratives or the conclusion of looking at the hues of people is because I used to paint for a living. I used to paint portraits specifically for a living. And so in painting portraits, you learn that no matter if you're going for realism, no matter what the human that you're, no matter what their skin tones, you always start with the same colors: cream, beige, and tan. You add darker browns for your shades. You might have pink rose for their lips. You might have sienna or canary yellow or olive green for skin tone or something like that. But it is all in the brown family. So I want to show you this drawing as I um, go through my conclusion, and then we'll be done. So here we go. Now, race is not biological fact, right? It is a social fiction built on historical violence, power, fear, yet it has shaped real lives, policies, perceptions for centuries. Identity, whether racial, cultural, or national, is not who we are. It is a story we've inherited, sometimes as armor, sometimes as a burden, sometimes as celebration. But the deeper truth is you are not your skin, and you are not your story. You are not the label the world has placed on you. You are the witness, the awareness inside the name, the breath beneath the narrative. To heal, we must first see clearly race is a real Um, or race is real in its consequence, but not in its essence. Identity can empower, it can also imprison, but it is not the whole of who we are. When we remember that, we begin to move from division into understanding, from performance into presence, and from surface into soul. Now, as you can see, this is a drawing of Chris Helmsworth, and you see the browns being used for the texture of the skin. You see how the highlights come in, you see the yellows and the oranges for, again, highlights. But I'm gonna speed through this, but you also see what we would normally identify as white in terms of color is used through the shades of brown or achieved through the shades of brown. If they wouldn't have colored in the eyes, you may not have known, or you may not have identified them as quote unquote white. But when we're talking about hue, when we're talking about color, all human beings are of the same color family, the whole spectrum of brown. And there is only one race of people, and that is the human race. We are all Homo sapiens. Everything else is divide and conquer. And I'm not saying that we don't have some issues because of the language and because of the constructs. We do have some issues. But getting back to truth, which is a hard thing to do, possibly can help us work some of that out. Now, my final thoughts, whether we're talking about culture, color, and heritage, are not who we are, but they are beautiful garments our souls wear in this life. Think about the things you attach yourself to and what that actually means. So, in closing, here are some books that I use for my research and that I pulled from in what I was talking about today. These are some of the books that I've read over the many years that influenced me. And so again, I did hold this up earlier. This is The Impact of Identity. This is Irene Nevslin. This is Noel Ignative. I believe that's how you pronounce the last name. This is How the Irish Became White. This is Robert Solomon, Existentialism. Jonathan Haidt. This is Happiness Hypothesis. Of course, Robert Sapolsky, Behave. Living Untethered by Michael A. Singer. It's a really dope book as well. And last but not least, now this one doesn't have any notes or bibliography or anything like that, so I'm a little about it, but it's still I still found it interesting and enjoyable. This was first published in 1879. This is by Martin R. Delaney, and this is The Origins of Race and Color. These are just a few I figured I would pull out and say like, hey, check these out if any of this interests you. These are some books that have helped me come up with my ideas and theories and stuff that I also pulled some stuff from. All right. I hope this has been helpful. I want to thank you for watching. As you know, hit the likes, leave a comment. Please leave a comment. Share with your people, share with friends, share on your page. subscribe so you know what's going on and what's coming up. I got a lot of good ones coming, some knowledge drops. People have been sharing with me what they want me to do. And if you have a knowledge drop you would like me to do, definitely place it in the comments. So, with that, I will bid you adieu. Peace.